Gopi Janavalabha Girivaradha Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana Yamuna Tira Yamuna Tira Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihar Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihar Divine grace of Bhagavatam and the Bhaktivedanta Swami Lord, all glory to some of the devotees. All glory to some of the devotees. All glory to some of the devotees. All glory to Shri Guru. Reading from Srila Prabhupada Leelamrita, Volume 6, Chapter titled Chant Hare Krishna and Fight. Mr. Rajda. We talked about it. Newly elected Janata members of Parliament. Mr. Rajda followed Prabhupada's point. What was that point? Material adjustment will never make us happy. Material adjustment will never make us happy. But asserted that a great change had taken place since the elections. The basic difference, he said, is that formerly there was no moral code observed by the rulers. He was entirely agreeable, or wanted to be, with Srila Prabhupada. Yet they were speaking on different levels. Both asserted that spirituality was needed in government, but Mr. Rajda's political conclusion was that such spiritual reform was now present in his political life. Srila Prabhupada, however, continued to speak of people who talk of God, yet don't even know the identity of the soul. He didn't specify whether this criticism applied to the former or to the present political party, although his remarks seem to include both. Whoever was not in transcendental knowledge, whoever tried to work in the material field without knowing the difference between spirit and matter, would come to the same inglorious end. No, said Mr. Rasta. The last rulers, most of them were communists. They said religion is opium. They didn't believe in religion at all. Therefore, Prabhupada said, they say something, we say something, he says something, you manufacture something. Nobody knows what is reality. That is the difficulty. Unless you know the reality, to suggest and say, I suggest it, does not mean that it is a solution. This is going on all over the world. The external features, these material features, They're concerned with that. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence. But they do not know that beyond this there is another element. Unless you come to that knowledge, there is no question of welfare activity. That knowledge is available in Srila Prabhupada accepted Mr. Rajda's visit as sincere and serious, and so he wanted to convince him to fully accept Krishna consciousness if he was really serious about introducing principles of dharma and morality into government. Real dharma had to start with acceptance of self-realization as the all-important goal of life. It could not succeed just by rubber stamping the government as religious. Now we have got good government, Srila Prabhupada conceded. Very nice. Now you should take advantage of the privileges which are there in India. The Bhagavad Gita is there. If you take directions from Bhagavad Gita, then benefit. That you do not know. That is the defect. Big leaders, they profess to be students of Bhagavad Gita, but they do not know anything. Although it is clearly stated. Who is the leader in India who does not know Bhagavad Gita? Everyone knows. Even to be arrested by the leaders of government. Srila Prabhupada, let me finish my Bhagavad Gita. Mr. Rajda was also studying the Bhagavad Gita very minutely while he was in jail. But now, said Prabhupada, he says that Janata is my God. Did he not say this recently? Mr. Rajda admitted that Moraji Desai had stated that, but that he had later clarified it. It is the government's responsibility to make people God conscious, Srila Prabhupada said. It is a very simple thing. God personally is explaining how to become God conscious. It is a very simple thing. Manmana bhava mad bhakta. Even a child can do it, so why not leaders? Then their example should be followed. Why don't they do this God consciousness? Do it seriously, then everything will be all right. They are defying the existence of God and reading Bhagavad Gita. This is their position. Srila Prabhupada ki. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd Canto, 9th Chapter, Text 37. Chapter titled Brahma's Prayers for Creative Energy. Tubhyang mad vichikitsayam. Tubhyang mad vichikitsayam. Atma me darshito bihi. Atma me darshito bihi. Nalena salile mulang. Nalena salile mulang. Pushkarasya vichinvata. Pushkarasya vichinvata. Tubhyan mad vichikitsayam. Atma me darshato bihi. Nalena shalile mulang. Pushkarasya vichinvata. Please chant. Tubhyang mad vichikitsayam. Atma me darshato bihi. Nalena shalile mulang. Pushkarasya vichinvata. Tubhyang me vichikitsayam. Atma me darshato bihi. Nalena shalile mulang.
Pushkarasya vichinvataha Tubhyang madvachikitsayam Atmameda Shatobhi Nalena Shalile Mulang Pushkarasya vichinvataha Tubhyang madvachikitsayam Atmameda Shatobhi Nalena Shalile Mulang Pushkarasya vichinvataha Tubhyan madvachikitsayam Atmameda Shatobhi Nalena Shalile Mulang Pushkarasya vichinvataha. Ladies, Tubhyang madvachikitsayam Atmameda Shatobhi Nalena Shalile Mulang Pushkarasya vichinvataha. Tubhyang madvachikitsayam Atmameda Shatobhi Nalena Shalile Mulang Pushkarasya vichinvataha. Tubhyam, unto you, mat, me, vichikitsayam, on your trying to know, atma, self, me, of myself, darshitaha, exhibited, abahi, from within, nalena, through the stem, shalile, in the water, mulam, root, pushkarasya, of the lotus, the primeval source, vichinvataha, contemplating. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. When you were contemplating whether there was a source to the stem of the lotus of your birth, and you even entered into that stem, you could not trace out anything. But at that time, I manifested my form from within. Please repeat. When you were contemplating whether there was a source to the stem of the lotus of your birth, and you even entered into that stem, you could not trace out anything. But at that time, I manifested my form from within. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. The personality of Godhead can be experienced only by His causeless mercy, not by mental speculation or with the help of the material senses. Material senses cannot approach the transcendental understanding of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It can be appreciated only by submissive devotional service when He reveals Himself before the devotee. Only by love of Godhead can one know God and not otherwise. The personality of Godhead cannot be seen with the material eyes, but it can be seen from within by spiritual eyes opened by the ointment of love of Godhead. As long as one's spiritual eyes are closed due to the dirty covering of matter, one cannot see the Lord. But when the dirt is removed by the process of devotional service, one can see the Lord without a doubt. Brahma's personal endeavor to see the root of the lotus pipe failed. When the Lord was satisfied by his penance and devotion, He revealed Himself from within with no external endeavor. Om Jnana Tamrandasya Ganajana Slakaya Chakso Anmalitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukam karoti vachalam pangum lankayate grim yatkipatamam bande shigurum daratanam. So one interesting, as I was reading this Srila Prabhupada's purport, Prabhupada calls the stem of the lotus a pipe. In India, a straw is called a pipe. When you go to the Lasiwala, if you ask for a straw, he'll tell you to go pick up a piece of straw from the street. You have to ask for a pipe. Then you'll get a straw. But the interesting part about the pipe is that Lord Brahma crawled down this pipe in order to try to ascertain the source, which he assumed was the source of his origin. That's logical. But how does this metaphysically manifest? So Lord Brahma is crawling down this pipe. Is that pipe an analogy for another aspect of interdimensional travel? Is this some type of gateway? Anyway, this is for the scientists among you to decide. What does that mean? Because when he went down, we saw from the previous verses, he couldn't find anything. And all he saw around him was blackness, darkness. Everything was dark. Until he performed his penance and devotion, at which time everything was revealed, which was already there, but was unseen to him. And I think we touched upon this in the last class. It was already there. Everything was there, but he couldn't see it. Very interesting. So in that sense also, we're in the same position. You know, when we go to Vrindavan, we're reminded to see all the residents of the Dham as four-handed residents, not just, two-handed cowherd boys and like the Sahajas wandering around thinking, oh, I see the gopis, I see Krishna. No. But we're reminded to see that these four living entities are not ordinary mortals. And it's said the same for all the Dhams, including Jagannath Puri, Dwarka, Mathura. It should be seen as four-handed. Means that they're residents of Vaikuntha in this. So it's a very interesting way that these things are all around us, but yet we haven't got the eyes to see. And in the Brahma Samhita, it also alludes to this. And it's a little bit Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, of course, on a platform far removed from mundane speculators. He's describing that Goloka and Gokul are on the same plane. Those of us who are poor in mathematics, we have to approach Arjuna Nanda, graduate. Plane doesn't mean that which is flying in the sky. In this case, the plane means on the same level, 180 degrees. So if they're on the same plane, why don't we see them? So that's described here. Same plane means they're coexisting simultaneously, the spiritual and the material. It's there, it's just unseen. So how is Vrindavan non-different than Gokul? Because it actually is Gokul. That's the purport Srila Bhaktisiddhanta is emphasizing. But Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochaneni, we don't have the eyes. Prabhupada often said that when being challenged. He said, you want to see God, but do you have the eyes to see God? So we're constantly reminded of this simple fact. The same he was saying to this Mr. Rajda. Their politicians make so many slogans. This is actually their job. Their job is not to govern. Their job is to be elected. That's their job. Most of their time is spent getting elected, and then once they're elected, to get reelected. So this is, and there's even a term called sloganeering. sloganeering, making some catchy phrase to get elected. The most famous one back in the day was a chicken in every pot. So what does that mean? What do people want? They want food on the table. Quite gross, no? Especially to those of us who are trying to be a little bit strict in the sense of adhering to religious principles. But the politicians will promise anything. So what do some politicians promise? Some politicians promise that they will maintain your abortion rights, death on demand. So what's better, a chicken in every pot or death on demand? Up to the point of birth, they'll kill the baby. They have all these euphemisms, late-term abortion, this, that, the other thing. But it is death on demand. Nothing more sinful. And they wonder where the wars are coming from, right? Two things, cow slaughter and infant slaughter. You know, if you continue such slaughter, does anybody know the calculation? How many children are killed every day in the United States, in just the United States? Do you know this? Oh, I know, it's around 2,300, 2,500 every single day. So multiply that by 365. That's just America. So this is not something that's sustainable, karmically speaking. There has to be war. And then people are surprised. It doesn't matter whether it's in this country or that country. That's irrelevant. But there has to be war. Until and unless the chanting of the holy names is completely spread to every town and village, which it obviously to a great extent it is. But it has to be continued in such a way and with such determination and with participation. Just like this, when Prabhu was talking to the same politician. He didn't mention it here, but in other places he said that the opening of Parliament, whenever they're meeting, I don't know how many months it continues on, everything should always open with kirtan. In other words, the government of India, when they meet in their big Parliament house in Delhi, very elaborate, very palatial, what they should be doing there is kirtan. And of course, not just the Indian government, all governments. So this is something which they cannot do. They don't know how to implement. They don't have the strength of conviction to do so. You know, they would require some, they say, they pride themselves on their so-called secularity. But what has that secularity achieved? So this is our purpose, our aim, our duty. And that's another concept that has to be identified. Duty is not simply that which is imposed externally for some mundane purpose, like the politicians, they so-called have their duty, right? But duty without knowledge is what? What is that? It leads to sin. What do they say? What did the famous, on the Nuremberg trials, what was the excuse of every person who was brought up there? I was just following orders. I was doing my duty. So following orders, you have to have some intelligence. If you do it blindly, then it's obviously leads to ignorance or sin or worse. You cannot have orders based on ignorance or duty based on ignorance. It must be based on knowledge. And real knowledge means in the Shastra, Shastra Chakshu, to see through the eyes of the Vedas. But this is a little difficult. Everyone wants to argue what is the correct meaning. They don't accept the conclusion of the realized souls. So this will continue. There will be no end to this argument. But people, by realization, when there's a situation going on now, there's some war, so to speak. Some people don't call it a war. They say, don't call it a war. But, war by any other name is still war, fighting, for some material purpose, without any real reason, demarcation based on a line drawn on a map 100, 200, 300 years ago. So this, what will be the end result? Now, an intelligent person knows that if he could see things through to the conclusion, then he would understand that all of this is a fruitless endeavor. Arjuna also saw, he didn't want to fight. He realized this is not going to benefit anyone. But his duty was slightly different. He was trying to abnegate. He was trying to avoid his divine duty, which was being instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So what was the difference? His duty was based on knowledge, not on ignorance. So what a difference, performing duty on the basis of knowledge as opposed to duty on the basis of ignorance. He was fighting for what? Dharma projita kaitavotra. He was fighting something which was based on cheating. He was reestablishing the principles of religion. Of course, we don't want to get into these mundane analogies people use all the time. Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He appeared 5,000 years ago. He was there on the battlefield of Kurukshetra as Arjuna's chariot driver. It is not an analogy. It's not a metaphor. But this is those who don't want to accept the conclusion of Bhagavad Gita, they press this point. That this is just some mythology. That it's all hyperbole or alliteration or something else. So we have to be careful when we're describing the conclusion of the Bhagavad Gita, Sarvadhamma Pratyajamam Ekam Sharanam Pracha, that it is given in such a way that the person understands that he is not the controller. This is the peace formula. And if he reflects seriously, he'll understand contextually how he is not the controller, how all these things are happening all around him. And he cannot control the gas prices. He cannot control the food prices. He cannot control anything related to his so-called material existence. What to speak of the other aspects. And people are crying in anxiety. Oh, what will I do? What will I do? They say this all. What is that? Oh, woe is me. Woe is me. Old English. Archaic English. Say, oh, woe is me. Do they have that in Icelandic? Did everyone here know that Icelandic is its own language? Okay, now you know. It is not Finnish or Norwegian or... Now, what language did the Vikings speak? Huh? Icelandic. Vikings were warriors. Fierce warriors. So that's, and we know what happened, right? Parashuram, 21 generations of Kshatriyas. Where did they go? They ran away from Bharatvarsha and they escaped to different parts of the earth, ending up in different areas. And Srila Prabhupada came back, of course, we understand Srila Prabhupada is Nitya Siddha, not an ordinary soul. Someone, like all these Nitya Siddhas we were reading in Nectar Devotion are eternal associates of the Lord. We don't want to speculate beyond that. But that's what the Shastra says. And so we can appreciate that, the Chaitanya Bhagavat alludes to the Senapati Bhakt, the commander-in-chief, coming to gather all. What does commander-in-chief mean? It means he's in charge of all the soldiers, right? The army, the Lord Chaitanya's army, which was lying dormant. This is obviously a pastime. Lord Chaitanya's army was lying dormant. The Senapati Bhakt came to the Western world. For some reason, that's where all these seeds were. Why do we have Lilamrita? What is the first volume Lilamrita called? Planting the seed. Lifetime in Preparation is the first, but planting the seed is the expansion of that. The only problem with Lifetime Preparation, which is the same reason why Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's biography is not. Has anyone here read Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's biography? It's in the form of a letter to his son, Lalit Prasad, who requested that his father give him some, biography. But Bhaktivinoda Thakur said, do not publish this, do not spread it around. It's available, but he didn't want it because there are things in there which would seem to contradict the life of a pure devotee. So then, what is the profit? Someone may misunderstand, and nothing worse than misunderstanding the purpose of a pure devotee. So be very careful when you come across such things on the internet, even Lifetime Preparation, and tendency to portray Srila Prabhupada in a very human way, so to speak. So so Lord Brahma climbing down the lotus pipe. So this, we understand it's there and that it's real. It's not just an analogy, metaphysical or otherwise. And it was his means of performing, because penance means some self-imposed austerity or ritual for purification, for ablution. So he had to do this. He had to do this. But through doing that, he was purified by this endeavor, because he came to the conclusion then that I can't see it, I can't find it. Let me now try to purify the other aspects of my existence. My external senses are not serving me, because that's the issue. The external senses could not ascertain So any questions, comments, corrections? Arjuna Nand? Due to the mercy of Braj Mohan, you'll have real peas, or what are you doing there? Huh? Pistachios. Just tell them to bring them without shells. What's the, don't they understand? Bring them without shells. Tulsi didn't have a question. You had a question. And the only problem with the microphone, I heard Maharaj also say, because of the reverberation, there's too much echo. So somebody has to adjust that board next time. The effects, the special effects, somehow or other, they have the reverb incorrectly set. So when you speak on the mic, you can't hear the speaker. You just echoes. But anyway, speak in such a way that they can hear, but also I can hear.
Okay, thank you, Prabhu. Two questions. One is, like now you spoke for quite some time, and my question is, why out of all important things that you said, the mind immediately caught for one thing, and this one thing was, and Bhaktivinoda Thakur said that in his biography, there are things that they should not come out because they may be interpreted in the wrong way. Immediately the mind said, this is what I want to know. You said much more important things. Why is that?
I mean, I know from my own perspective, the tendency is there to seek affirmation that I am not alone in my journey. But then it makes you mentally try to put yourself on the same platform. And obviously, we are not on the same platform. But if someone's thinking, oh, well, Bhaktivinoda Thakur was a grahasta, he had 13 children, and he was this and he was that, I can do the same. No. And Srila Bhaktisiddhanta also similarly said, you can have, if you can have Krishna conscious children, then have hundreds of them. Have as much sex as you like. But who will raise 100 Krishna conscious children? You know, we see from the lives of the pure devotees, if this is not something that happens artificially or otherwise. You know, we see Srila Prabhupada, and this is the point. Then you start to look at things materially speaking. Someone will say, oh, well, Srila Prabhupada's children were not devotees. You know, but what does that mean? They were devotees, but we don't know what is their position. There are many people in Krishna's pastimes that don't appear to be devotees. But understanding things from a philosophical perspective, they're all devotees. You know, so we should be, and if we're doing something that appears to be examination of some material, historical facts, then others may take our example as well. So we have to be careful. Someone will say, well, he's reading that. I can read it also. So there we're bound to a certain discipline, not to set a bad example, not to speculate, not to overly endeavor. Like I said, knowing the life of the pure devotee, it's very nice to see the examples of their, what did Prabhupada say when pressed at the airport here in New York? When he came, and they said, the reporter kept saying, but when did you realize Krishna or God? When? You know, Prabhupada said, you know, because he was insistent. Prabhupada had given several answers. I've always been Krishna conscious. And then finally he said, since 4 or 5. And why is this pertinent? Because how many people remember activities when they were 4 or 3? You were conscious. You remember what you were doing? There are certain, I forget the terminology, but there are certain instances that will embed in the memory due to their circumstances. So it could be a good circumstance or a bad circumstance. It's like trauma can be repressed. You know, something bad happened. You don't even remember what it was, but somehow or other it's there and comes out 50 years later or whatever, something like that. But very few people remember. But Prabhupada's saying from 3 or 4, this is the very edge of formed memory. When people remember their day-to-day activities, usually it happens when you start to go to school because it's a regular routine. You get up every day, you went to school, sat there with the teacher, and you had friends outside of the family, you know, outside of your immediate circle of wherever you lived. So these memories expand and form, and then something is happening at that point. So Prabhupada's saying that he remembers Krishna conscious 4 or 5. This is as early as in the material world anyone has any formed memory. You can actually say, I remember when I was 4 years old, it was the spring of 1954. No, people don't remember those things. Very haphazard. You remember an instance, perhaps. You know, your mother did something like Prabhupada said. He remembers sitting on the lap of his sister. You know, different things. He remembers what? What else does he remember? The riots. The riots in Calcutta. You know, these things were happening. He was only a young boy, very young. But those type of things you can remember. He was almost killed, he said. So any other questions? So does that answer your question?
I also remember that somewhere in Bhagavatam, there was description that all the planetary systems actually they are within the stem of the lotus. Do you remember this, Prabhu? Somewhere. So it was.
We have to show that in the Vedic planetarium, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
So it's not a very small pipe. Must be huge.
Or the planetary systems, if you compare them with the lotus, are extremely small.
When they, I remember that was one of the proposed aspects of the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium, that you have, you know, Mahavishnu, and you have the stem, and then you have Lord Brahma, and then you have all the planetary, because Lord Brahma is in Satyalok, so that's the topmost planet, and then all the planetary systems situated below. So let's see how they finally do that, Vedic cosmology. That'll be very interesting. But yeah, I mean, in all, this material scientists, this is also one of the, Sariputta was presenting how it is not seen necessarily from a three-dimensional perspective. That it has to be, that other aspects have to be taken into consideration. What is it? What do the demigods see that we don't see? What is that visible? And I think we've spoken about this at other points. There are certain frequencies of light and sound that we do not hear, that even a lower animal can hear. So why is it that humans cannot hear it or see it? You know, so we're not the absolute pinnacle of perfection in all regards, just in the ability to understand, who am I? So we have that capacity, whether you call it intellectual or philosophical or spiritual, that no other living entity in the material world has. But demigods are already situated at a certain position, and we don't see them. Prabhupada would say the demigods are here. devotees would look around. And they'd be showering flowers and doing all these different things. They'd be observing Krishna's pastimes. But we don't see them. They're not visible to our eyes. So but then we forget when we try to compare again, we're reading, we see some material conception of the cosmos, and it doesn't look very orderly at all. It doesn't look like how you would expect intelligent design to be reflected. Unless, of course, we see from, Sariputa's, models and projections. And then you see, according to the Bhagavatam, how everything is there. Whether they're described as dweepas or islands or discs, it all makes sense, especially if you have the conception of the lotus stem, because things are not rotating out of, just like orbits are sometimes described as elliptical, which means not completely concentric around a particular Lego. They may be different sizes and shapes, and they're all basing that on some observed calculation with their imperfect senses, so they don't know. But yet, everything has to be constructed in such a way that there's no conflict. I don't know how long have humans been looking up at the sky, and every once in a while they say, oh, there's a supernova. It happened 50 billion years ago, a zillion light years away. It's all speculation. It's all speculation. But somehow or other, all these planets are floating effortlessly. And they're not colliding with one another. And they don't understand how this is happening. They have no but they know that if this thing shifted just slightly, the earth was tilted just slightly on its axis, the poles would shift, Florida would become New York, and New York would become the Sahara Desert. Nobody has any idea how these things are so perfectly aligned. But they are hesitant to ascribe it to a higher intelligence because they don't want to accept God. That's the bottom line. They don't want to accept God. So we're very fortunate that we've come in contact with a pure devotee in a bona fide sampradaya. This is another important fact. When I was young and I was interested in martial arts, we were very careful to be in the line of disciplic succession of a particular style. Not just somebody who thought that they knew something and decided to form a school. No, it had to be from the Grand Master through his student, through his student, through his student. Because you wanted to get the real thing. So if people are so meticulous in selecting a so-called martial arts teacher, because they call them like that, guru, sifu, then how much more particular should he be in seeking out a bona fide spiritual master, coming in the line of disciplic succession? Evam parampara praktam imam raja sayo viduhu. So we have to take it seriously. Otherwise, why not? People are taking so many things seriously. Why don't they take spiritual life seriously? So that is our duty, to try to impress upon them the seriousness of spiritual life in the human form, not in the dog form or not in the chicken form or some other form, but in the human form of life. So that intelligence Krishna will give us, how to speak according to the time and circumstances, to deliver Krishna, because that's all we're doing. We're not actually, what can our 3 minutes of interaction do? They can impress upon a person if we're conducting ourselves accordingly. We're being, would it at least be a gentleman, right? Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's admonition, at least be a gentleman, which means cultured, give a good impression, that this person, oh, I met a Hare Krishna and he was very nice. That's preaching. And obviously the opposite is there as well. I met this Hare Krishna, he was not very nice. We know some people like that. We have to represent our spiritual master in the best possible light. So we should always be trying for improvement in this regard by studying, by chanting, by our actions and practice, because it is not just theoretical. You cannot explain devotional service to someone if you are not properly, practically engaged. Otherwise, it is all, what does it say? What did Srila Bhaktisiddhanta say? Philosophy without religion is mental speculation. And religion without philosophy is sentiment. So we have to know these things. We have to present them. We have to maintain them. Not simply practice ourselves, but we also have to maintain. We don't allow deviation. Right? We have to understand what is required of us in relationship to our vows to the spiritual master, to adhere faithfully to his instructions, not sentimentally that Srila Prabhupada is my guru and he's given me something. No, he is much more than simply a guru. He is the bona fide representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And that anyone can see how Krishna consciousness has spread in such a short time. This is inconceivable. It is nothing short of miraculous. People will not accept it or acknowledge it, but at least we should see it and understand, that this is not just some other society. If you go to India, you walk down the road, you do parikrama. Every 5 feet, there's a signboard. And what does it say? This society, that society, this society, that society. How many thousands of societies there are? But what is the use of all such societies? Not one is giving anything of practical value to the population to free them from the cycle of birth and death. Only the pure, unadulterated Krishna conscious movement can accomplish that. So it is a great burden of responsibility. And it's sometimes reflected in physical things like a temple. It's a burden of responsibility to maintain it for its intended purpose, to greet and accommodate sincere spiritual seekers. We're not here just to feed the homeless and the poor. We can do that also. Prabhupada said nobody should go hungry. But more important is that they should not go away unsatisfied spiritually. They should take a book. They should have prasadam. They should meet a devotee. These are the important aspects, at least for us, in relationship to our duty to the spiritual master. That he has given us If it is a burden, it is a burden of love. And that it has to be seen as such. Not that it is a burden like a headache. So much to do, right? Matanga knows this. So much to do. So many headaches. But these headaches are purifying because one accepts them voluntarily in order to satisfy the spiritual master and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. We welcome these. Otherwise, how do we get an opportunity to show our love for Krishna? If not through adversity. Queen Kunti was praying. What was she doing? She was not saying, no, stop all this, Krishna. I'm your, what was Kunti? She was his auntie. I always like the way they say that in India, auntie. So, he could have just, he said, what are you doing? Just alleviate all this suffering. We don't need this. You're the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Do something. No, she didn't. She said, let these calamities come again and again. And in this way, we can remember you. So who are we to think that, we should not be having any difficulties? And our difficulties are insignificant in perspective. Everyone thinks his difficulty is the most, what can you say, horrible thing. Back to that woe is me, self-pity. But this is, like I said, there are children being killed in the womb, thousands a day. Tens of thousands of cows slaughtered every day. So much burden of sin. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. So much burden is there. And Krishna doesn't have to come personally. He comes, he just, some incident and creates a huge war, just like that. Boom. 1 month ago, there was nothing. Now there's a huge war. Seemingly out of nowhere, right? But that's to the less intelligent. As devotees, we should understand these things will happen again and again. They will never cease. Maybe there'll be some gap. And if there's any gap, it's only because of the propagation of the chanting of the holy names. And therefore, that shouldn't, give us continued impetus more and more to chant and chant. So they have I think we have our continued chanting today in the temple room. It's a little bit delayed because there's Ramayan Katha. So instead of starting at 4:30, it will start at 5:30. Make sure somebody pass that along to Ram Roy Prabhu, because Nikunj Bihari is scheduled. Got that, Arjuna? 4:30 to 5:30. Any other questions or comments? Oh, now Arjuna has a question. Now it's 5 after. Now he has a question.
This question is just from a preaching point of view. And, we say that Lord Parshuram came because he had a purpose to destroy all the Kshatriyas. But doesn't it seem to be defeat in purpose, since many of the kings escaped to other places?
I was thinking the same thing. He came just to scatter the soldiers of Lord Chaitanya's army. No, is it that way? That's the purpose. No, who knows? We don't know. What is the purpose? He came to establish religious principles, the demoniac burden of these sinful rulers And he accomplished that. But Krishna is always doing things 2 for 1, right? To deliver the pious. So that's that whole dual purpose thing. So yeah, so obviously Parashuram was killing the demons, but he was also doing something else. You know, we can say that, yes, maybe that's the purpose. We don't know. Send all the Kshatriyas to Iceland so they can become devotees thousands of years later. How does that happen? Krishna makes these arrangements. How did all these devotees just pop up in the Western world, you know, on the arrival of the pure devotee? No, this is something that someone else will have to write years down the road. Someone like Arjuna Prabhu, when he writes the history of the Hare Krishna movement. Okay, no more questions. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki. Ishta Gosti directly after breakfast in the Lotus Room. Remember, anyone going upstairs, make sure you're back down with anyone who's up there.